Now it's time for the last word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, my friend Lawrence, and I'm sorry I'm late. I'm still getting the hang of this.
Take your time. Ari, big legal night tonight. The president tweeting his way into a federal criminal investigation and a federal criminal prosecution, the Mueller, the Manafort trial. And it seems as though so many people have forgotten that the President of the United States must not ever make public comments about ongoing investigations and trials.
Which he used to claim he wouldn't do, and is one of the many things that I think had his lawyers backpedaling as we've been reporting, and eager to see what you're doing on it, because if everyone liked what he said, they would stand by it. Instead, they were arguing all day. He didn't really say this was an order, should stop in public, looks like evidence of obstruction.
Thank you, Ari.
Thank you, sir.
Well, today is an historic day, a truly historic day in the Trump presidency in this country. It is an historic day in the 229-year history of the American presidency because today we did really arrive at the Fifth Avenue moment.
I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
Today was that day. Today, the president appeared to commit a crime in public. And for the last 2.5 years, since Donald Trump said he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it, he has been preparing his voters for this day. And he has been preparing the Republican Party for this day. And he has been preparing the American news media for this day. And the president's plan appears to have worked. He has successfully brainwashed his voters to the point where they just don't accept what they don't just accept what he did today. They will cheer for it. They do cheer for it. And as we saw last night, they will scream and curse and threaten any reporters who challenge the president in any way for the Fifth Avenue moment today. The Republican Party, which sent 16 candidates into battle with Donald Trump for the Republican presidential nomination, has completely surrendered to Donald Trump. And those defeated Republican candidates who still have jobs in the United States Senate, where they could control the Trump presidency, have completely surrendered to the Trump presidency. They all appear completely brainwashed now. We have never seen anything like this in American politics. And today is the day that the president needed them to all be brainwashed. Senator Ted Cruz said absolutely nothing today, not one word, when Donald Trump had his Fifth Avenue moment, when Donald Trump publicly obstructed justice today, which he did in more than one way, which we will get into in a moment. Not one word from Ted Cruz about that today. And here is what that same Ted Cruz said about the president 2 years ago.
This man is a pathological liar. He doesn't know the difference between truth and lies. He lies practically every word that comes out of his mouth. The man cannot tell the truth, but he combines it with being a narcissist. A narcissist at a level I don't think this country's ever seen. The man is utterly amoral. Morality does not exist for him.
Now Ted Cruz worships at the altar of Donald Trump. Ted Cruz has forgiven every sin Donald Trump committed against him, against his father, and the horrible things he said about Ted Cruz's wife. Ted Cruz has even forced his young children to shake the hand of the man he called utterly amoral. Marco Rubio did not sound afraid of Donald Trump 2 years ago.
He's a con man. I think it's time to unmask him for what he is.
I will not allow the conservative movement to be taken over by a con artist by the name of Donald Trump.
And today, that same person sounded brainwashed.
President Trump is calling on Sessions to end this quote-unquote rigged witch hunt right now.
He said that before. I've already told you guys my feelings about it. So I think Mueller should finish his work, and the truth is what is going to be good for the president and good for the country.
He said that before. No, he hasn't said that before. The Trump brainwashing is working. When Donald Trump says something outrageous and criminal that he has never said before, and it feels like, sounds like he has said it before, it's the brainwashing that makes it feel that way. The year and a half of beating down any and all Republican resistance to the point where every new crazy, illegal thing that the president does feels familiar, feels like a place we've already been. We are in a new place tonight, though. Thanks to the president's tweet this morning saying Attorney General Jeff Sessions should stop this rigged witch hunt right now before it continues to stain our country any further. Bob Mueller is totally conflicted, and his 17 angry Democrats that are doing his dirty work are a disgrace to USA! Exclamation point. There are two potential crimes in that tweet, two. One of which has not been mentioned at all today. And our first guest tonight, Jill Wine-Banks, noticed it, and she and I will discuss it in depth later in this hour. Democrats were outraged by the president's obvious attempt at obstruction of justice today, but Republicans, in their surrender to Trumpism, have forgotten what they used to think about special prosecutors' investigations of presidents of the United States.
Mr. President, I'm deeply troubled today because Judge Starr's pursuit of the truth is being undermined every step of the way, every single day in the press by those whose sole mission is to attack and impugn the court-appointed independent prosecutor and the congressionally created process. And these attackers are not the journalists or the broadcasters. Mr. President, what troubles me the most here is that these reckless attacks, these ruthless onslaughts, are being carried out by the closest advisors to the President of the United States. My point here, Mr. President, is simple. The attacks on Kenneth Starr are unfounded and unproductive. The attacks are, in fact, unconscionable.
Unconscionable. This is the moment in Mitch McConnell's career when standing up to the unconscionable is the most important thing he can do. It is the most important moment in Mitch McConnell's career. And there will not be a video library that lives forever in history showing what Mitch McConnell had to say at this point in the challenge that Donald Trump presents to the United States of America, because Mitch McConnell has been so silent at every turn. In history, we will be turning to the blank tape of Mitch McConnell saying nothing about what Donald Trump does. That Mitch McConnell was silent today. He was silent today in the face of a president publicly obstructing justice. Mitch McConnell could not find one word to say about it. Presidents of the United States cannot comment on ongoing criminal investigations and prosecutions, and Mitch McConnell used to know that. Everyone knew that. Prior to Donald Trump, it only happened once in the modern history of the presidency, and it was a shocking mistake made by the well-trained lawyer turned president, Richard Nixon.
I noted, for example, the coverage of the Charles Manson case when I was in Los Angeles. Front page every day in the papers. It usually got a couple of minutes in the evening news. Here is a man who was guilty, directly or indirectly, of 8 murders without reason.
And the country and the news media were stunned because the problem was Charles Manson was still on trial for those murders when the President of the United States said that he was guilty. And so immediately that very day in court in Los Angeles, Charles Manson's lawyers moved for a mistrial in the case because the President of the United States prejudiced the outcome. President Nixon's press secretary immediately issued a statement saying that the president did not mean to suggest that Charles Manson was guilty. And later that same day, President Nixon issued a carefully written statement saying, "I do not know and did not intend to speculate as to whether the Sharon Tate defendants are guilty in fact or not. All of the facts in the case have not yet been presented." The Manson trial judge was able to deny the motion for a mistrial only because he believed no damage was done by the president's comments, because the jury was sequestered in the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, where they were not allowed to read or hear any comments about the case. But Paul Manafort's jury is not sequestered. They are going home every night with an instruction from the judge to not read or listen to anything about the case. So the Manafort jurors are at home tonight in a country where the President of the United States today called the prosecutors in their case angry Democrats who are doing dirty work. Richard Nixon, at his worst moment, wouldn't dare call the lawyers defending Charles Manson a disgrace to the USA, and that is exactly what the President of the United States called Paul Manafort's prosecutors today, a disgrace to USA. So the president is actively interfering in a current prosecution in court, and he is trying to stop any other prosecutions brought by Robert Mueller and stop the Mueller investigation entirely. And he did all of that in public today because his lawyer told him to. Last week, Rudy Giuliani said, if you're going to obstruct justice, you do it quietly and secretly, not in public. Giuliani is insisting now that it is impossible to publicly obstruct justice. And today, Rudy Giuliani's defense that the president was not obstructing justice with his tweet turned on the meaning of the word should.
What it is, as we said immediately, it's an opinion. And he used a medium that he uses for opinions, Twitter. And I mean, one of the good things about using that is he's established a clear sort of practice now that he expresses his opinions on Twitter. He used the word should. He didn't use the word must. And there was no presidential directive that followed it. He didn't direct him to do it, and he's not going to direct him to do it.
Should. Rudy Giuliani told the Washington Post, quote, he very carefully used the word should. On the advice of his lawyer, did Rudy Giuliani advise the president to use the word should in his tweet so he could defend him publicly against obstruction of justice and base that defense entirely on that one word, should? What most Republicans and much of the news media has lost sight of is that presidents must not give their opinions about ongoing criminal investigations and prosecutions. There is no innocent version of a president of the United States putting his finger on the scales of justice with his opinion about criminal investigations and prosecutions. But a year and a half into the Trump presidency, the president today decided he was ready to say the thing that he had not publicly said before. Attorney General Jeff Sessions should stop this rigged witch hunt right now. If there was a tape of Donald Trump saying that in the White House today, it would be the smoking gun in an obstruction of justice case. But Rudy Giuliani has told him to do his obstructing in public as if he was standing on Fifth Avenue with a gun. There was a deeply perverse twist in Donald Trump's tweet today. Right after he tells Jeff Sessions to stop the Mueller investigation, Attorney General Jeff Sessions should stop this rigged witch hunt right now before it continues to stain our country any further. There is now not a day that goes by that Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani don't find new ways to continue to stain our country. Leading off our discussion now, Jill Wine-Banks, former Assistant Watergate Special Prosecutor, Matt Miller, former spokesperson for Attorney General Eric Holder, and Jennifer Rubin, conservative opinion writer at The Washington Post. All three are MSNBC contributors. And Jill, we're going to talk later in the show about what you see as the Trump tweets' effect on the Manafort trial, which is hugely important. But first of all, let's go to what Rudy Giuliani is saying today about the word should is not an order. What do you make of Giuliani's defense of what the president was saying today?
I think it's a very weak defense. And I will also say that it is a question for the jury as to whether should is an order or just an opinion. And I think that when presented to a jury, they would find in the context of all of the other tweets that the president has done and all the other actions that he has taken, including the firing of Comey, that they would find that the word should was an order and that it was intended that it be obeyed. Now, he was wrong because, of course, the Attorney General is recused in this case, and he cannot take any action. But the president doesn't care about that. He said it should be ended, and it goes along with all of his other tweets that have said this is a bad investigation, it's a hoax, it's a witch hunt, Mueller is bad, his staff is bad, Sessions is bad, the FBI is bad, Strzok is bad. He has undermined the investigation from day one. He has polluted any possible impact on a potential jury in any case because of what he is saying.
Jennifer, help us pause for a moment and consider where the country has come. From that Nixon slip of the tongue, and it really was, there wasn't anyone out there who watched Richard Nixon do that who thought he didn't make a mistake and that he corrected it as fast as he possibly could about the guilt of Charles Manson while Charles Manson was still on trial. We've gone from there to now where it is considered absolutely routine that, of course, the President of the United States gives his opinion. Rudy Giuliani said it's a well-established pattern that the President of the United States gives his opinion. He gives it on everything. And Giuliani leaves out that, of course, the President of the United States must never, ever give his opinion on an ongoing investigation and/or prosecution.
I think there are three things to keep in mind. First is to remember this occurs during the pendency of a trial. In the past, when we'd had these discussions about obstruction of justice, there was some question, well, does it really count that it's just an FBI investigation? Maybe he's not really interfering with a proceeding under the law. This is clear. It is a trial. He's asking not only that the entire investigation be stopped, but the trial be stopped in its tracks. I can't think of anything that is more evidentiary, and this goes to the second issue, of corrupt intent. That's the name of the game. Evidence that Donald Trump, from the get-go, as Jill said, has intended to obstruct, delay, short-circuit this investigation. And when he says things like this, it's not only that in and of itself is obstruction, but it is evidence of intent. And that, I think, is now so plainly clear that all he has cared about is getting rid of an investigation into his cronies and into himself, that the issue of corrupt intent, which is usually hard to prove, is actually going to be quite easy to prove in this case. And the third thing I think we should remember is that everyone was assuring us that the Paul Manafort trial really didn't have anything to do with Donald Trump. Well, I beg to differ. I think this is the beginning of the end, because what did Donald Trump do again and again? He denied he or anyone on the campaign had ties to Russia, had any communications with Russia. And this is the first time that we're seeing evidentiary proof that that is false. And Donald Trump, I think, knows very well where this is leading. We are going to learn a lot about in this trial, but more so, I think, in the next one in D.C., that Paul Manafort was thick as thieves with the Russians. And for him at that level of the campaign to have those relationships with the Kremlin and Kremlin-tied figures, I think goes a long way towards proving the collusion/conspiracy theory.
And Matt Miller, I know with your experience in the Justice Department, you know that previous presidents have not even been tempted to make public comments about ongoing criminal investigations and ongoing, currently underway criminal prosecutions. But your reaction to what you saw in the president's tweets today and in Rudy Giuliani's defense of them?
You know, you're right, Rudy. Excuse me, you're right, Lawrence. It is slip. You're right, Lawrence. It is a red line for any president to cross to interfere with an ongoing investigation, a trial, any Justice Department proceeding, or anything the Justice Department is pursuing. The problem with the president, yes, this was an escalation today, but he crossed the red line a long time ago, and he never went back after he crossed it. He has kind of stayed over on the wrong side of that line and has been continuing to pressure the Justice Department, not just publicly in his tweets and in his speeches, but also privately in pressuring them, pressuring Jeff Sessions to back off from his recusal, pressuring Rod Rosenstein in repeated meetings of them where he's asked about the investigation. Every one of these is an inappropriate action by the president. And I think, the defense that Rudy came out with today, I think, is probably the best you could do in this circumstance. But what it ignores is the totality of all the evidence. And the interesting thing, I think the most interesting thing about what he said that has been lost on a lot of people is, he kind of granted that it would be legally problematic if the president was issuing an order here. That's implicit in their defense of saying that he wasn't issuing an order. Well, that may be the best he can do today, but the problem for his client is that the president has issued orders to interfere with this investigation in the past. Let's not forget, the New York Times reported that he ordered Don McGahn to go to the Justice Department and get Bob Mueller fired. So if it's true, as Rudy Giuliani seemed to concede today, that it is inappropriate, legally inappropriate and problematic for the president to issue a direct order interfering with the investigation, well, that's something his client has already done.
Jennifer Rubin, count me as one of those people who still cannot get used to the idea that Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan and the Republicans just sit there and accept this, and with their silence, they are, in effect, cheering it on. To see that video of where Ted Cruz was talking about Donald Trump from his heart about what a pathological liar he is, and to listen to the sound of Ted Cruz's silence today remains an extraordinary thing.
It does. And even people who are supposed to be the good Republicans, like Susan Collins, makes these mealy-mouthed statements. Oh, he really shouldn't do that. He should just let the prosecutor do his work and finish. There is no sense of outrage. There is no desire to defend the institutions of democracy. It is if it is all some kind of game, that their highest obligation is to defend him, is to defend whatever political position, whatever Looney Tunes legal argument he is making, and they are completely devoid of any view, of any belief that their highest obligation is to the country. We talk about Donald Trump betraying the United States by, in essence, being, for all intents and purposes, an agent or an accessory for Vladimir Putin. What about these people? They're doing the same thing. They've betrayed the country. They've betrayed their oaths of office. And I fail to see how any of them are fit for office after this.
Matt Miller and Jennifer Rubin, thank you for starting us off tonight. And Jill Wine-Banks, please stay with us. We're going to discuss the point that you raised with us earlier today about what you saw in this tweet, and that is the possible crime of jury tampering, which no one's been focusing on. We're going to go in and take a sharp look at that. Also coming up, communication with Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller. Apparently, a communication between the Trump lawyers and Robert Mueller this week might have set off the tweets that we saw today. And some of those tweets might have been co-written by the Trump lawyers, including Rudy Giuliani, last night. Perhaps the word should was Rudy Giuliani's idea last night. That's coming up. There are multiple reports tonight that a discussion that the president had with his lawyers last night about a recent proposal from Robert Mueller inspired the president's tweets this morning, saying that the Attorney General should stop the Mueller investigation. One report indicates that the president's tweet this morning was actually discussed and planned in the president's meeting with his defense lawyers last night. Rudy Giuliani told NBC News that Robert Mueller's latest proposal is to narrow the scope of a possible interview with the president. Giuliani said there was slight movement, not enough to answer the concerns, but enough at least to continue, at least discussing for a short while longer. Two main topic areas, collusion and obstruction, or you can look at it another way, pre-presidency or post-presidency. Giuliani made it clear that the president's team does not want to discuss anything that happened after the president took the oath of office. Giuliani said every question they've propounded on obstruction, he's already answered publicly, so they know his answer. What they really want to do, we think, is get him under oath. So then, even though we say he's telling the truth, they can say Comey contradicts him. Joining our discussion now, David Corn, Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones and co-author of the best-selling book Russian Roulette, also with us. David is an MSNBC political analyst, and Tim O'Brien's also with us. He's the executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion. He's the author of Trump Nation, The Art of Being the Donald, and Tim is an MSNBC contributor. David, we have reporting tonight from multiple sources indicating that what we saw on Twitter today came out of a meeting with the Trump lawyers last night.
Well, I guess that's a little surprising because it usually seems like he's tweeting completely on his own without any guidance. The fact, though, that they're guiding him this way is also kind of unbelievable because he's out there saying one lie after another. I mean, each week I feel like we hit a different rock bottom. The depths of his mendacity with these tweets today are, I want to say astounding, although, you know, Lawrence, it's not astounding anymore. I mean, just out there saying, this all began with a Steele dossier, a lie that Sarah Sanders repeated at the White House press conference. And yes, I said the word lie because it is a lie. So if his lawyers are advising him to put out tweets like this, they are advising their client to lie. And, you know, I don't think that's going to end up being a good strategy in the long run.
And Tim, there's a report in the New York Times tonight about the status of the interview discussion, which this program's official position is it's always been fraudulent. There's never a chance that Donald Trump would ever sit down for an interview with the special prosecutor. There's a particularly gullible passage in the New York Times report tonight saying Mr. Trump has told advisors he is eager to meet with investigators to clear himself of wrongdoing, the people said. In effect, he believes he can convince the investigators for special counsel Robert S. Mueller III of his belief that their own inquiry is a witch hunt. Now, I don't believe the New York Times has ever printed a more gullible sentence that Donald Trump believes he can convince Mueller's team that what they're doing is a witch hunt.
You know, I'm going to surprise you because I actually think that sounds very much like Donald Trump to me.
You think he's that sick?
Oh, it's not. It's that he has this sense of himself as constantly in control of processes that he's not in control of. And that's why you see these collisions with his lawyers who know that they have on their hands a profoundly loose cannon. I think everything they want to do is to avoid having him sit down with Mueller. And Rudy is spouting off all of this stuff about he's already answered in public about obstruction. He really hasn't. What they're deathly afraid of is under oath, Donald Trump will sit there and they will present a preponderance of evidence that contradicts everything he's saying, evidence he hasn't seen before, and he will damage himself under oath. And I know he's capable of this because he's done it in front of me. We put him under oath in our own litigation. He lied under oath about a number of things, and when he was forced to comment about records in front of him, he was put in a corner. They don't want him there. The problem with him is his ego is so massive, and he really doesn't have a sense of his own faults, that I think he does think he can sit across from Robert Mueller and convince Mueller and Mueller's team that they're wrong. I actually think that Times report sounds spot on to me.
David, the man who is now saying today that the Attorney General should end the Mueller investigation said this about his conversation with James Comey. This is December 2017. He said, "I never asked Comey to stop investigating Flynn." And if there's anything that is credible about Donald Trump, it's that he asks people to stop investigations, as he did today, publicly.
You know, I run a bureau of 20 people. If I say to someone, you should write the story, in my mind, I'm instructing them to write the story, and I expect to see the story. So this whole should thing. But, without getting caught in semantics, this is what the beginning of a constitutional crisis looks like. The President of the United States asking or telling the Attorney General, who is recused, to unrecuse himself and stop an investigation that seems to be getting even closer to Trump and his inner circle. And, we get kind of distracted by the outlandish drapings that come out on these decisions. And then we get bogged down with Rudy Giuliani semantics. But at the core of this is a fundamentally un-American, authoritarian impulse. And that really should frighten people. And it goes to your point earlier about Republicans saying absolutely nothing about what I hate to say is kind of a historic moment.
Tim, Rudy Giuliani today saying that the special prosecutor should put up or shut up at the same time that he has spent the entire year, that the Trump team has spent the entire year avoiding an interview that the special prosecutor has been asking for.
Well, right. They want to speed this along to the extent that they can when they say they want to, because they want to limit the scope of this investigation. Everything's in Bob Mueller's favor to continue probing this to its logical outcomes. It's not only just an obstruction and a collusion investigation. There's also a possible exploration of high crimes and misdemeanors pertaining to financial quid pro quos that we know very little about. Bob Mueller knows way more than the press knows and way more than Rudy Giuliani knows, and Giuliani's frightened by that. Another thing on this point earlier that, Trump never gave any guidance around the Flynn issue. We know from reporting this week in the New York Review of Books that there was a White House memorandum in which both Reince Priebus and Don McGahn told the president that the FBI was interested in Flynn before Trump talked to Comey.
Tim O'Brien and David Corn, thank you both for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Coming up, Congressman Eric Swalwell will join us. He crossed what may be a line for him today when he tweeted to the president about Robert Mueller, "You fire Mueller, we fire you. And the other potential crime in the Trump tweets today that no one has really been talking about, Jill Wine-Banks saw it. She will explain it next. 2 words to contemplate during the break: jury tampering. On day 2 of Paul Manafort's trial, the president did something we have never seen any other president do. He deliberately, willfully, and with premeditation interfered with that trial. He tweeted, "These old charges have nothing to do with collusion, a hoax." So there's the president of the United States telling the Paul Manafort jury that what they are witnessing is a hoax. In another tweet, the president compared his former campaign chairman to the murderous gangster Al Capone, and then told the Manafort jury that Paul Manafort is, quote, now serving solitary confinement, although convicted of nothing. The president is finding every way he can to try to tell the Manafort jury what he used to say about Paul Manafort very directly, that Paul Manafort is a good guy. We know exactly what would have happened in court today if Donald Trump had tweeted the opposite about Paul Manafort. If Donald Trump had tweeted that Paul Manafort is a disgrace to USA. If Donald Trump had tweeted that Paul Manafort is guilty. Paul Manafort's lawyers would have immediately moved for a mistrial, and the judge would have been forced to grant a mistrial and end the Manafort prosecution. Former federal prosecutor Jill Wine-Banks believes that what she saw the president do today is nothing less than the crime of jury tampering. Jill Wine-Banks is back with us. And Jill, when you pointed this out to us today, I have to say I hadn't seen it myself. I hadn't thought about this as a direct interference with the Manafort trial.
Well, because the jury isn't sequestered, they may see this. I know they're not supposed to watch the news or hear the news, but it's so all-pervasive that I worry that they might. And I think the words that you just read are really a message to them in the same way that I think that the Arpaio pardon was a message to witnesses. You don't have to cooperate. Don't worry about it. You can be in contempt of court and I'll pardon you. So I think he's sending a message. And he also, in addition to the language you read, he also was very complimentary to Paul Manafort by saying that he had worked for Ronald Reagan and and Dole, and that he was a political operative. So he was going out of his way to say things that were laudatory about this defendant. And it's just simply inappropriate for a president of the United States to use a public means of communicating, which Twitter is. And Judge Naomi Reese Buchwald in New York ruled that tweets were a public mechanism for the president. Sean Spicer has said that they were official statements of the White House, but in Judge Buchwald's ruling, she said that he could not block people who criticized him on Twitter because it was a public forum. So I think that you put all of that together, and I think he's using a public forum to send a message to the jury that he should not have his former campaign chair convicted of anything. He said he's not been convicted yet.
And Judge Ellis handling the case is a 78-year-old judge who we have every reason to doubt knows how Twitter works or what it looks like, and doesn't realize that on Twitter, information can come up that you're not looking for. You might be looking for your granddaughter's tweet, and a Trump tweet could easily come up there. Here's what the jurors hear every day, what they'll be hearing when they leave the courtroom every day. Judges' instructions when they left today were you must resist talking to anybody about this case, resist television, radio, or whatever else reports about this case, and don't listen to any of it. They don't know what you know. You were here. Do not undertake any research or investigation on your own. Put it out of your mind. And Jill, every courtroom practitioner I know realizes that most jurors actually do their very, very best in trying to obey those instructions, but there are always some who don't even try. And in this case, the likelihood of the Trump information getting through is extremely high.
It is a risk, and there's no question that jurors do their very best They take instructions like that very seriously and will really follow it. They will not watch television. They will not read newspapers. And so I think they will be careful, but this is a different world. And when you mentioned Judge Ellis, I'm also concerned about how strict he's being on the prosecution in terms of the evidence that he's allowing in. So far, he has not allowed certain photographs in that I think will take this case from being just a documents case to being much more interesting to the jury.
Jill Wine-Banks, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, President Trump pushed Congressman Eric Swalwell too far today. Congressman Swalwell will be our next guest. Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell, who will join us next, is a former prosecutor who chooses his words very carefully. He is always a calm, deliberate speaker. And today, in reaction to the president's tweet saying the Attorney General should end the Mueller investigation, Congressman Swalwell replied, "Fire Mueller and we fire you." And so today, the Democrats in Congress have come to the impeachment crossroads. Congressman Eric Swalwell is a member of the House Judiciary Committee. That is the committee that has jurisdiction over the presentation of articles of impeachment. Impeachment is something that Democrats under Nancy Pelosi's leadership in the House have avoided talking about up until today because the leaders of the party have believed impeachment is not part of their winning campaign formula.
I have hesitated to use impeachment. People wanted me to impeach President Bush for going into Iraq. And they impeached President Clinton. There is an investigation. If it takes its course, let it take its course. But I do not think that impeachment is a policy agenda.
That was on May 23rd, what is now a long time ago. And today, Donald Trump took two big steps closer to impeachment if Congressman Swalwell and the Democrats have the majority on the Judiciary Committee after the election 97 days from now. Jill Wine-Banks, who was part of the team who delivered the special prosecutor's report to the House Judiciary Committee that was used as the basis for the articles of impeachment that forced Richard Nixon to resign the presidency, says that Donald Trump is now guilty of jury tampering with the Manafort jury today. That wasn't part of Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats' campaign calculations yesterday. And so what do the Democrats do now? What will they do and say about impeachment in the 97 days before the election? Congressman Eric Swalwell will join us next.
I say this in my role not as a lawyer, but as a concerned citizen and Republican. But this election is going to be about impeachment or no impeachment.
Joining our discussion now by phone is Congressman Eric Swalwell. He is a member of the House Judiciary Committee and a member of the Intelligence Committee. Congressman Swalwell, I have to say, when I saw your tweet today saying, "Fire Mueller and we fire you," it seemed that the terms of engagement changed today for Democrats.
Good evening, Lawrence. And I think it's important that the president knows what those terms are. We're not going to lead with impeachment. We're going to lead with health care and, reducing corruption in Washington, D.C. and protecting paychecks. But we're also not going to look the other way if the president continues to obstruct in plain sight. And, so this president, if he wants to fire Mueller, he can see us in the Judiciary Committee, and he can see thousands of people in the streets who have already signed up at TrumpIsNotAboveTheLaw.org, who have said that they will go to the streets, to the White House, to protest.
If the president fires Mueller, would the Democrats initiate impeachment proceedings if you win back the majority in the House?
I believe that firing Mueller is the same as firing Rosenstein, and it is seeking to stop the person from investigating you. So I believe you'd see the number of Democrats who support it now more than double, but I believe Republicans would also come on board. And I say that because I've talked to many privately who have drawn that as their own red line. But people should also know, Lawrence, that this is not the Mueller investigation. This is the United States government investigation. So he can fire Bob Mueller or Rod Rosenstein. The investigation will go on. And he should actually, I think, from the way that Mueller has conducted this investigation, keep Mueller. Mueller has, kept quiet and is giving him due process. And he doesn't know what he's going to get from the next prosecutor. But the evidence in this case is not going away.
Your colleague, Adam Schiff, the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, said this today. The President of the United States just called on his Attorney General to put an end to an investigation in which the President, his family, and campaign may be implicated. This is an attempt to obstruct justice, hiding in plain sight. America must never accept it. Congressman Swalwell, if this is obstruction of justice that we saw today in plain sight, why would Democrats be reluctant to talk about impeachment?
We shouldn't be, and I think we should just make it clear that, we still prioritize the needs of our constituents, which is their rising health care costs, their uncertainty about where their next paycheck's going to come from, and concerns that there's corruption in government tied to all the outside influence of money. But we also have a responsibility to make sure that nobody, including President Trump, is above the law. And also, Lawrence, the president has to know that Bob Mueller has already written if you're reading this, I've already been fired letter, and has probably sent it to the Southern District of New York and has probably sent it to the Attorney General of New York. So again, this isn't going away, and he can fire all the lead investigators he wants, but people are going to continue to work on this case.
It seems we can expect the president's jury tampering in the Manafort case to continue because it would seem to be his objective is to do whatever he can to get a hung jury or not guilty. Anything that isn't a successful outcome for Robert Mueller on that first prosecution, the president must believe that would be a huge win for him personally.
Yes, it seems that he is trying to, in any way, inflame the proceedings. But as you pointed out earlier on the show, and I've prosecuted dozens of cases to verdict and have talked to the jurors afterwards, overwhelmingly, they follow the instructions from the judge. They don't talk about the case during the trial. They don't listen to outside influence about the trial. And so it looks like the case here is one that is going to be heard fairly, whether the president likes it or not.
And with 97 days to go in the campaign, it's impossible for Democratic strategists to anticipate how this issue of impeachment could be different a week from now, how it could be different tomorrow. Do the people quietly, however they're talking about this in the House, realize that whatever plan they have to put impeachment at the low end of their public priority list, it's not up to them what President Trump might do to change that?
Lawrence, our first responsibility is, to defend the Constitution and the safety of the American people. And if we have a president who's just a wrecking ball to norms and institutions, we have to be agile and ready to act. I think the best thing we can do is, to have the House called back into session and to preserve the investigation as it is. There's already legislation that's passed the Senate Judiciary Committee that Mitch McConnell should bring up. And I believe the House should also pass that legislation to show the president that there is no way out of this. But again, Republicans, this is their red line as well.
Congressman Eric Swalwell, thank you very much for joining us on this important news night. We really appreciate it. Tonight's Last Word is next.
One person who's apparently not worried about Mueller's investigation is Donald Trump. For over a year now, his catchphrase has been "no collusion."
There was no collusion at all. No collusion, no nothing. No collusion, no nothing. No collusion. No collusion. No collusion. No collusion.
He uses it for every occasion. It's like his aloha. It means both hello and I'm guilty.
Stephen Colbert gets tonight's last word, and that word is guilty.
Hey, it's Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Every day I come to the office and we make a television show. And every day I think to myself, there's so much more I want to talk about. And so this is our podcast. It's called Why Is This Happening? And the whole idea behind it is to get to the root of the things that we see play out every day. They're driven by big ideas. Each week, I sit down with a person uniquely suited to explain why this is happening.
New episodes of Why Is This Happening? Every Tuesday. Listen for free wherever you get your podcasts.